After a couple weeks of playing, I finished what I guess were the first attempts by ArenaNet at expansions or DLCs for Guild Wars 2 called Living World Season 1 and Living World Season 2. For those who haven't watched my previous video, I am playing Guild Wars 2 chronologically from the beginning as a new player, so if you're curious as to how much I got done in the core game, definitely check that video out and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our adventures in Tyria. In this video, I'll be giving my thoughts on what I think was everything good and bad about Living World 1 and 2 for other newer players who may be considering doing this content. There will be a big story spoilers for the core game Living World 1 and 2 in this video as a heads up. Going into Living World Season 1, I was informed by my livestream viewers that the content I was about to play was originally served up for a limited time from January 28, 2013 to March 18, 2014, and that people essentially had to make sure they were available every 2 weeks or so for each episode of Season 1 real time, which explained why after some episodes the pop-up text on my screen would say 2 weeks later, because it would have literally been 2 weeks later in both Tyria and reality. While I love the concept of that on paper, I can also see why players back then would have been a bit miffed at how the content was implemented, considering it wasn't until 2022 that the developers brought back Living World Season 1 to be permanently in the game. Perhaps because of this history of Living World Season 1, I unexpectedly had a few problems with the content I think was ultimately underwhelming, badly paced, and honestly a bit boring at times. The first issue I had with some of Living World 1 was that the storytelling seemed a bit cut up or badly paced. There was an entire episode in the middle of Season 1 where you just put into the dead end bar, which in itself seems to be a recurring gag location mentioned by literally every alcoholic NPC, and you're essentially forced to recap everything you already know up to that point, sitting through dialogue and forced interactions with objects. This episode may have worked when people were waiting weeks and weeks for episodes back in 2013, but it did not age well for 2024. One significant difference between the core game and both Living World 1 and 2 was definitely the change in the style of storytelling or dialogue. Previously in core game, the game would shift to mini cutscenes with characters talking to one another turn by turn. In Living World 1 and later 2, the dialogue cutscenes were gone and my player character's voice, which was a surprising but welcome design choice in the core game for a MMORPG, was also gone, which I felt detracted from the storytelling of Living World Season 1 and 2. So basically, the cutscenes turned into in-game dialogues that just kind of plays while you're walking around and so forth. Additionally, the pacing for gameplay in some of the quests for Living World 1 was also awkward, with waves of enemies arriving incredibly slow to a quest point after the previous wave had died 20 to 30 seconds ago, making you just kind of sit there. A combination of outdated content and also power creep probably contributed to this kind of awkward pacing. Living World 1 doesn't really give you any new maps as well to explore or new gameplay mechanics or features. It's basically more story in the core game with some more hoops to jump through depending on the episode or quest. That's not to say there wasn't engaging content, which I'd say were the twin boss fight that you can also find in Fractals, or the Tower of Nightmares, which also had its own ups and downs similar to that one dungeon in the Zone of Ore. As for the story itself, Living World 1 starts off rather slow, putting you back into the world almost immediately, following the core game's underwhelming finale where Zaitan, one of the Elder Dragons, was slain by you and the Tyrian Pack Coalition. Living World 1 gives you an introduction to your own group of close-knit friends and adventurers that mirrors the more famous Destiny's Edge guild. You meet Rox, Braham, Taimi, Casimir, and Marjorie. Out of all these characters, I have found Taimi to be my personal favorite, and it was nice to see more of her and Kate from Destiny's Edge in Living World Season 2. The villain introduced in Living World 1 called Scarlet Briar was okay, I guess. Basically, imagine the Joker in plain form driven to madness by seeing the eternal alchemy, essentially the face of God. Scarlet, who's portrayed as a mad genius, loves blowing things up, manipulating groups for her end goal, and making really big drills. I think the most interesting thing about Scarlet is that she's a setup for the later lore implications, which I think was nicely touched upon in Living World Season 2. I think perhaps the two biggest tangible reasons for any player to do Living World Season 1 apart from the story is going to include the achievement mastery system, where you can fulfill certain tasks or achievements in each episode for more rewards, which I think is great as it offers an incentive for people to replay the episodes of a season and to also do something later down the line after having gone through other expansions in Guild Wars 2. The second reason to do Living World 1 would probably be to get the free 20 slot inventory bags, which are quite nice for newer players, though I feel like you can buy these for somewhat cheap in the player marketplace anyway, assuming you've played through the core game. In summary, unless you really care about experiencing Living World 1 yourself or getting those 20 slot bags or achievements done immediately, I would recommend honestly skipping it. I don't think you're missing out on much, and you can look at the trailers or cutscenes from the more important parts of the story on YouTube, which we also did on recommendation of some viewers after completing the season. All in all, I was a bit disappointed by Living World 1, but was assured by many people that things in Guild Wars 2 gets a lot better with Living World 2, which I felt wasn't true either. Living World Season 2 expands more on your newfound crew's adventures and attempts to quell the next Elder Dragon's awakening called Mortarmoth. For the first half of Season 2, Taimi once again shines as a great character, putting the likes of Bram and Rox in the background again with little to no character development. On the other hand, Marjorie and Casimir sees some character development in the aftermath of Marjorie's sister's death. Belinda's death forces Casimir to spend time away from Marjorie and in our company as we attempt to navigate the surface level politics of the human court in Divinity's Reach. Content-wise, Season 2 offers a lot more than Season 1 with two new unique maps, Drytop and the Silver Waste. The jump puzzle in the Silver Waste was decent, the environmental events and rewards from both Drytop and the Silver Waste were decent as well. I could tell that Season 2 was perhaps the beginning of Guild Wars 2 experimenting even further with map verticality and depth than what I had experienced in the core game. Examples being the movement orbs that lets you jump up plateaus and the incredibly huge size of the underground areas. Overall, Season 2 seemed a bit more engaging every step of the way in terms of story and gameplay, as opposed to the short spurts of difficulty or gameplay in Season 1. However, like Season 1, there definitely were tedious or just weird moments where things felt too long for the sake of being long. In contrast to most of Living World Season 1 or the core game of Guild Wars 2, it felt to me that Season 2's boss fights were preparing new players for more advanced mechanics or fights that we have yet to see. The encounters that I experienced in Living World 2 felt slightly more coordinated than the previous content. That felt like the developers were just tossing random AoEs and attacks at you to see what could kill you. Probably the biggest positive of Season 2 was the world building. In addition of lore to Guild Wars 2, what seemed to be callbacks to the first Guild Wars, which is great because you get more involved in the world as a result of understanding that world. Probably the best example of this in Season 2 is Kate and her memories being used as vehicles to eventually lead us to the riveting plot twist that the entire race of Sylvari is subject to the control and manipulations of Jungle Dragon Mortarmoth, as the Sylvari are considered part of his spheres of plant and mind. With all this being said, unlike Living World Season 1 and the core game, Living World Season 2 does come with a price tag of $16 US, which is certainly up to you to decide on whether that price tag is worth it or not, assuming you played through the first Living World. I'd probably recommend skipping Season 2 if you're going to skip Season 1 anyway, and again catching up with the story through other sources like YouTube or the wiki, or I'd recommend buying it at a discounted price if possible. At the end of my playthroughs here, I can't help but feel slightly disappointed by my experiences in Living World 1 and 2, and I'm really hoping that the same people who told me Living World Season 2 is where it gets good weren't exaggerating either about Heart of Thorns being good, because I definitely don't want to experience people constantly telling me it actually gets good after that expansion or this expansion until I reach the last expansion. Before I end the video, I'd also like to mention that I experienced my first holiday event in Guild Wars 2 during my playthrough of Living World Season 1 and 2. I had fun with the Halloween event, with the jump puzzles being the highlights for me, and as I approach the first expansion, Heart of Thorns, I'm looking forward to playing during the winter holiday event as well. Just as I said in the core game review as a new player, it's been fun figuring out a couple more of the systems in the Guild Wars 2 as I go along with the content, and I'm hoping Heart of Thorns will push me a bit harder and make me try a bit more. If you want to keep up with my next adventure in Heart of Thorns, feel free to stop by my live streams or subscribe to the channel for the next video. Thank you for your support and time. I appreciate you all.